In 211 BC, Rome introduced a silver coin that would become the backbone of the ancient world's most powerful economy, the denarius. 4.5 grams of nearly pure silver, one coin could pay a legionary for a day's work or buy a family's weekly grain. For 2 centuries, its value remained rock solid. But then something changed. Slowly, almost invisibly, the coin began to lose its soul. By 268 AD, that same denarius contained just 0.5% silver. Everything else? Cheap bronze and copper underneath a thin silver wash meant to fool the unsuspecting. Welcome to the Ledger Chronicle, where the vault of history unlocks the secrets of money and power. The collapse of the denarius wasn't just about bad coins. It was about how an empire convinced itself that it could print prosperity, spend without limit, and ignore the laws of economic reality. And in the end, Rome didn't fall to barbarians. It fell to its own balance sheet. To understand what Rome lost, you need to understand what it built. When the denarius was introduced during the Second Punic War, the conflict with Hannibal that nearly destroyed Rome, it wasn't just a coin, it was a promise. The Roman Republic needed to fund a massive military mobilization, and it needed its citizens to trust the currency they were paid in. So Rome did something radical. It created a standardized silver coin with real intrinsic value. Not token money, not promissory notes. Actual silver that held worth anywhere in the Mediterranean world. The early denarius weighed about 4.5 grams and was 95 to 98% pure silver. You could melt it down, and the metal alone was worth what the coin claimed to be worth. Face value matched intrinsic value. This is what economists call sound money. And it worked brilliantly. As Rome expanded across Italy, North Africa, Greece, and eventually most of Europe, the denarius became the reserve currency of the ancient world. Merchants from Britannia to Egypt accepted it. Soldiers were paid in it. Taxes were collected in it. It was trusted because it was honest. During the first 2 centuries of the empire, especially during the Pax Romana, the long Roman peace from 27 BC to 180 AD, the Roman economy flourished like nothing the world had ever seen. Trade networks spanned 3 continents. Cities grew massive. Infrastructure projects, roads, aqueducts, amphitheaters transformed the ancient world. And underneath all of it sat the denarius, stable, predictable, trusted. Inflation during this period was minimal. Prices remained relatively constant for generations. A skilled craftsman in the time of Augustus could earn 1 denarius a day. A century later, under Trajan, that hadn't changed much. This wasn't an accident. The early emperors understood something fundamental. You cannot have prosperity without monetary stability. Augustus actually increased the silver content of the denarius when he came to power, restoring trust after the chaos of the civil wars. He knew that confidence in the currency was confidence in Rome itself. But here's the paradox. Rome's success created the conditions for its own monetary destruction. As the empire reached its territorial peak around 117 AD under Emperor Trajan, something shifted. Expansion stopped. And when expansion stopped, so did the inflow of plundered gold and silver from conquered enemies. Meanwhile, the costs of empire kept growing. A massive standing army stationed across dozens of provinces. A sprawling bureaucracy. Grain subsidies for Rome's population. Massive construction projects. Bribes to keep border tribes pacified. The Roman government had no bond market. No modern methods of deficit financing. If the treasury ran short, they had only 2 options: raise taxes or find more silver. But there was a third option. One that seemed clever at the time. One that every government in history has eventually discovered. They could cheat. The year was 64 AD. Rome burned. The Great Fire destroyed much of the city, and Emperor Nero had ambitious plans for rebuilding, including a lavish new palace for himself, the Domus Aurea, the Golden House. He needed money, fast, and he needed more than the treasury held. So Nero did something that no emperor before him had dared to do on such a scale. He debased the denarius, he reduced its weight and dropped the silver content from 98% to roughly 90%. What did this accomplish? For every million denarii collected in taxes, Nero could now mint more coins at the same face value. Instant profit. The difference went straight into the imperial coffers. To the average Roman citizen, the change was subtle. The coins looked the same. They spent the same. Life went on. But to the merchants who handled thousands of coins, to the money changers who weighed silver for a living, they knew. Trust began its slow erosion. The precedent was set. And once that door opened, it never closed. What followed was a cascading disaster that played out over 2 centuries. Under Trajan, the silver content dropped to around 85%. Under Marcus Aurelius, the so-called philosopher emperor, it fell to 75%. Septimius Severus and his son Caracalla brought it down to 50%. Each emperor faced the same problem. Soldiers demanded higher wages to make up for the declining value of their pay. The government needed more money to pay those soldiers, so they debased the currency further, which led to higher prices, which led to demands for even higher wages, which led to more debasement. It was a vicious cycle with no exit. By the mid-3rd century, the period historians call the crisis of the 3rd century, everything collapsed at once. Political stability evaporated. Between 235 and 284 AD, Rome had more than 50 emperors, most of them military commanders who seized power, needed money immediately to secure loyalty, and debased the currency even further to pay their troops. The denarius as a meaningful silver coin effectively ceased to exist. It was replaced by the Antoninianus, a coin supposedly worth 2 denarii, but containing only 1.5 denarii worth of silver. Then the Antoninianus itself was debased over and over, until by 268 AD it contained less than 1% silver. The government was now minting what were essentially bronze coins with a microscopic silver coating and insisting they were worth their old value. It was monetary fraud on a civilizational scale. And the Roman people weren't stupid. They adjusted. Here's what the archaeological evidence tells us. In the early empire, a modius of wheat, about 8.5 liters, cost around half a denarius. By the 270s AD, that same amount of wheat cost 200 denarii. A soldier's daily wage went from 1 denarius under Augustus to over 1,000 denarii under Diocletian. But in real terms, in actual purchasing power, wages had collapsed. Inflation didn't just erode savings. It destroyed the middle class. Anyone holding cash saw their wealth evaporate. Anyone on a fixed salary, teachers, government clerks, lower-ranking soldiers, became destitute practically overnight. People stopped accepting the official currency altogether. Barter became common. Wealthy citizens hoarded old coins with actual silver content. Foreign coins started circulating because they were more trusted than Roman ones. The empire's economy, once the most sophisticated in the ancient world, regressed into localized, primitive exchange systems. Towns that had traded across continents now struggled to buy grain from the next province over. And here's the critical detail that modern readers need to understand. This wasn't a sudden crash. It was a slow-motion catastrophe that played out over generations. No single emperor woke up and decided to destroy the currency. Each one made a small, seemingly rational decision to solve an immediate crisis, but those small decisions compounded. That's how monetary collapse actually works, not in a single dramatic moment, but in 1,000 quiet compromises. By the time Emperor Diocletian came to power in 284 AD, the Roman economy was in ruins. Inflation was rampant, the currency was worthless, trade had collapsed, tax collection had become nearly impossible because money changed value by the day. Diocletian was a pragmatist and a reformer. He recognized the crisis, and he tried to fix it the way governments throughout history have tried to fix inflation when they refused to address the root cause. He issued price controls. In 301 AD, Diocletian published the Edict on Maximum Prices, one of the most comprehensive economic documents from the ancient world. It listed over 1,000 goods and services and set maximum legal prices for each: grain, wine, meat, clothing, labor. Everything was capped. The penalties for violation were brutal. Merchants caught charging more than the legal price faced execution. The logic seemed sound. If inflation is prices going up, just make it illegal for prices to go up. Problem solved. Except it didn't work. It never works. What happened instead is what always happens when governments try to override market reality with force. Goods disappeared from official markets. Farmers stopped bringing grain to cities because the legal price didn't cover their costs. Merchants stopped importing goods because they couldn't make a profit. Craftsmen refused commissions because the controlled wages weren't worth their time. Black markets exploded. People still needed food, clothing, tools. But now they had to buy them illegally, at much higher prices than before the edict, with the added risk of punishment. The edict created exactly the opposite of what it intended. Instead of bringing prices down, it made scarcity worse. Instead of stabilizing the economy, it drove commerce underground. Within a few years, the price controls were quietly abandoned. They had failed completely. But Diocletian did do one thing that worked, at least temporarily. He introduced a new coin, the Argentius, with real silver content, and the gold solidus, which would become the basis for Byzantine currency for centuries. The solidus succeeded for one simple reason. It was honest money again. It contained the gold it claimed to contain. People trusted it. But here's the tragedy. Even this reform couldn't fully reverse the damage. The Roman economy had been so thoroughly broken by 2 centuries of debasement that even sound money couldn't restore what had been lost. Trust, once shattered, is extraordinarily difficult to rebuild. The collapse of the denarius didn't cause the fall of Rome by itself. That would be too simple. But it accelerated every other problem the empire faced. Without a stable currency, the government couldn't pay its armies reliably. Soldiers became loyal to generals who could pay them, not to the empire. That led to civil wars and fragmentation. Without a functioning economy, tax revenues collapsed. That forced the government to debase further, creating a death spiral. Without trade, cities shrank. The middle class disappeared. The complex, interconnected Roman world splintered into isolated, self-sufficient estates, the seeds of medieval feudalism. By the time the Western Roman Empire officially fell in 476 AD, it had already been economically dead for over a century. The denarius, once the symbol of Roman power and prosperity, had become a worthless token. The empire that built roads to every corner of Europe couldn't maintain a stable coin. So what does a 2,000-year-old currency crisis have to do with today? Everything. Because the pattern Rome followed is the same pattern that has destroyed currencies throughout history. Weimar Germany, Zimbabwe, Venezuela, Argentina, Turkey. The names and dates change. The mechanism stays the same. Step 1. A government faces expenses it cannot cover with taxes or borrowing. Step 2. It inflates the money supply, either by debasing coins or printing currency or expanding credit. Step 3. Prices rise. Wages rise more slowly. Savers are wiped out. Step 4. The government tries to control the consequences with price controls, capital controls, currency restrictions. These fail. Step 5. Trust in the currency evaporates. People flee to foreign currencies, barter, or hard assets. Step 6. The economy collapses into dysfunction. The political system follows. Every step of this process, the Roman emperors walked. Every mistake they made, modern governments have repeated. And the core lesson remains unchanged. You cannot print your way to prosperity. You cannot spend without limit. You cannot debase money and expect people not to notice. Eventually, reality asserts itself, and when it does, the consequences are devastating. Today, no major currency is backed by gold or silver. The US dollar, the euro, the yen, they're all fiat currencies, backed only by government authority and trust. Does that mean we're Rome? Not necessarily. Modern central banks have tools the Romans didn't. They can manage money supply more precisely. They can coordinate internationally. They have centuries of economic theory to guide them. But they face the same fundamental temptation the Roman emperors faced. When governments need money and don't want to raise taxes or cut spending, the printing press is always there. And every time it's used, a little bit of trust erodes. Since 1971, when the U.S. abandoned the last link between the dollar and gold, the money supply has exploded. Debt has soared. Asset prices have inflated far beyond wage growth. Wealth inequality has widened to levels not seen since the Gilded Age. Most people don't notice these changes day to day, just like most Romans didn't notice when Nero shaved a few percentage points of silver from their coins. But the effects compound. Savings lose value. The middle class shrinks. Faith in institutions weakens. We tell ourselves it's different this time, that we're smarter than the ancients, that we've mastered monetary policy in ways they never could. Maybe we have, or maybe we're just earlier in the same cycle, convincing ourselves that the old rules don't apply anymore. The denarius lasted 500 years. For half that time, it was the most trusted currency in the world. Then, slowly, through small compromises and desperate decisions, Rome destroyed it. The collapse didn't happen in a day. It happened in degrees. A little debasement here, a temporary measure there. Each generation passing a slightly weaker currency to the next, until finally there was nothing left to pass down. Rome fell because it spent more than it earned, borrowed more than it could repay, and printed more than its economy could sustain. The barbarians just delivered the final blow to an empire that had already bled out from its own financial wounds. That's the real story of the denarius. Not a coin, a warning. If this gave you a new perspective, hit subscribe. History has the answers, and I'll show you where to look.